You ever see a news report and there are two totally opposite headlines, but they're both citing the exact same study? Well, today we're diving into a source that claims to explain how that happens. We're going to look at how a single set of numbers can be spun to tell completely different stories. Let's break down the statistical illusions it describes. This is really the big question for our whole explainer today, isn't it? It kind of suggests that the story we get from data isn't just about the numbers themselves. Nope. It's about the framing, the formulas, and all the rules that are chosen behind the scenes. It's all about the method. All right, so the first major idea from our source is this. You can get a completely different result from the very same data just by changing up the formula you use. Let's check out the example it gives. Okay, so here's the hypothetical scenario laid out in this source material. Just imagine we have 100,000 people who've been vaccinated. Each of them gets 5 doses, which gives us a grand total of 500,000 doses. And in this scenario, there are 80,000 deaths. The numbers themselves are pretty straightforward, but you just watch what happens next. And boom, here is the result. Just look at that split. It's dramatic. On one side, you've got this staggering 80% mortality rate. But on the other, it's a much, much lower 16%. I mean, that's a huge difference, right? And remember, both of these came from the exact same starting numbers. So how is that even possible? Well, it all comes down to the denominator. That's the number on the bottom of the fraction. The source argues that if you divide those 80,000 deaths by the 100,000 people, you get that really alarming 80% rate. But if you take that same number of deaths and divide it by the much larger number of total doses, that's 500,000, suddenly the rate plummets to just 16%. The choice of what you divide by, it argues, changes absolutely everything. So changing the math is one tool. But the source we're looking at says there's another really powerful way to shape the outcome. You just change the rules of the game itself. You get to decide who gets counted in the first place. So here are 2 specific rules the source highlights. First, it claims that if you exclude any negative stuff that happens in the first 14 days, you can make a treatment look a whole lot safer than it might actually be. And second, it alleges that if you reclassify people who miss a booster as unvaccinated, you can end up artificially pumping up the number of bad outcomes in that unvaccinated group. And it doesn't just stop there. The source we're analyzing goes on to list a whole toolkit of other statistical tricks it claims are actually recognized in academic papers and can be used to massage the results. So let's run through this toolkit real quick. The source mentions artificial cancellations, which is basically a fancy term for cherry-picking data that supports your side of the story. Then you've got underreporting from non-responses, meaning if a bunch of people don't answer a survey, you might be missing the real picture. It also points to discriminating on causes of death, like, say, blaming a death on a pre-existing condition to move it out of your data set. And finally, over-aggregating data. That's just lumping everyone together, which can totally hide specific risks that might be hitting a smaller, more vulnerable group really hard. Okay, so after laying out all these alleged methods, the source gets to the so what question. To argue for why this stuff matters in the real world, it starts pulling in official excess death figures to frame the potential impact. First, it points to Italy, citing official estimates from ISTAT, which is the Italian National Institute of Statistics. The document says there were about 275,000 cumulative excess deaths, and that's deaths above and beyond the normal expected number from the start of 2020 to early 2024. And then it zooms the lens way out to the whole continent. For Europe, it references Eurostat estimates, putting the cumulative excess death figure for that same period at a truly staggering 1.5 million people. And here is the source's final, and I have to say, pretty provocative argument. To try and put that 1.5 million number into context, it puts it right next to estimated military losses in the war in Ukraine. Now, the point of this comparison, from the source's perspective, is to argue that when numbers get this big, the statistical methods we just talked about, well, they aren't just academic. They could potentially be obscuring a crisis on an absolutely enormous scale. So, after walking through all the claims in this source, we're left with this one last really crucial question. In a world where we are just constantly bombarded with numbers and data, what does it actually take to find the truth? It's a huge challenge, and it's on all of us to be more critical thinkers when it comes to data. Thanks for joining me.